Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for December 12th, 2022. The revelation from Angela Merkel in an interview with the German paper Die Zeit last week just opens the door to demonstrate the absolute corrupt, deceitful nature of Western politicians. What Merkel admitted in the December 7th interview is that the Minsk Accord, which Germany signed in 2014, was not meant to stop the killing in eastern Ukraine, but was meant to, quote, give Ukraine invaluable time to get stronger, unquote. So why was Minsk negotiated in the first place? It was to stop the killing of Ukrainian citizens by Ukrainian soldiers and militia in the eastern Ukraine region of the Donbass. And why were there killings going on? Well, because many of the people living in eastern Ukraine objected to the coup in February 2014 and objected to anti-Russian measures that were implemented, as well as the overall anti-Russian attitude of the new coup government toward the population in eastern Ukraine. They opposed the coup and they opposed the measures. And as a result, fighting started, supposedly because of a Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine. But in fact, despite all the talks of Russian troops, there was no evidence of that. In fact, what there was evidence of was of consistent shelling and killing, more than 14,000 people killed between 2014 and 2022, with the killing initiated by the Ukrainian army. So there was a negotiated settlement in 2014 in Minsk, and it was signed by Ukraine, Russia, with Germany and France as guarantors. But it was never implemented. Even when Zelensky ran for president, he said he would carry through the Minsk Accords, but he never did. And there are reports that when he tried to initiate the fulfillment of these accords, he was told that if he does sign this and go through with it, he'll be found hanging from a tree in a public square in Kiev. And who told him that? The same neo-Nazi militia people who were engaged in the killing in the Donbass. So Poroshenko said it was not serious and they intended to buy time. And from 2014 to 2022, tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and special forces were trained by NATO governments. So now Merkel admits the same thing as Poroshenko. It was not serious. They didn't intend it to end the fighting and the killing. So we have a response from Vladimir Putin in a press conference the other day to this. Now, what Putin said is, it shows, what Merkel said shows that we did everything right from the point of view of launching a special military operation. In other words, to protect the people of eastern Ukraine, it was necessary for the Russians to move in. But he said the one mistake was they may have waited too long. And here are some more of his comments. Quote, "It has turned out that no one was going to implement the Minsk agreements," unquote. He went on to say the leadership of Ukraine, as follows from what the former president Poroshenko has said, also acknowledged they were not going to act on what they had signed. But I still expected, Putin said, that the other participants would be sincere with us. It turns out they also deceived us, their aim being to build up Ukraine's military muscle and prepare it for hostilities. He said, we had hoped we would be able to achieve a settlement within the framework of the Minsk agreements. Then he said on Merkel's statement, it was completely unexpected and disappointing. Frankly speaking, he said, I did not expect to hear this from a former federal chancellor because I've always proceeded from the assumption that the German leadership is sincere with us. Yes, of course, it was on the side of Ukraine and supported it, but it seemed to me that the German leadership always sincerely strove for a settlement on the principles that we had agreed on and which were achieved within the framework of the Minsk process. As a result of what Merkel has now admitted, Putin said, now there is a question of trust on the agenda, and it is already close to zero. So the question arises, how can we go on the business of negotiations? What can be negotiated, whether it's possible to negotiate with anyone at all, and where the guarantees are. He said, I've said many times that we're ready for agreements. We are open. But this makes us stop to think about who we are dealing with. Now, this is extremely significant and should not be underestimated, given all the talk of what's about to come in Ukraine. Will the Russians be launching a new offensive? Are the Ukrainians capable of a new offensive? Will there be more weapons going into Ukraine? And so on. But here's the bigger question. Where's the outrage in the European Union? The outrage over the fact that leaders of the European Union lied about their commitment to stop the killing. Macron himself now admits that Putin raised legitimate security demands. Well, if that were the case, why did he just recognize it now and not a year ago or 2 years ago so that the fighting could have been prevented? And now the cold winter is starting to hit in the European Union. The heating costs have skyrocketed. Food costs are up. There are shortages. In Germany, the price of eggs and butter have more than doubled. Many items are unavailable on shop shelves. So what's happening in Borrell's paradise? Well, what's happening is the threat of a wider war is real. And in the United States, at a time of austerity at home, adding another $37 to $40 billion in weapons to Ukraine in what will be a losing cause, where's the outrage? Now, this is something that we'll be addressing in the days and weeks ahead. There are growing indications of anger, including in the U.S. Congress. Will it come to anything, or is it just talk? What about in Europe? Will there be more people in the streets as the shortages worsen, as the prices worsen? Will people step up against these lying, deceitful figures who represent them in Brussels, in the European Union, and in NATO, and in the governments at home? Now, at the same time, we have a new series of warnings about the economy. The New York Times had a headline on December 3rd, "Defaults loom as poor countries face economic storm." And they talk about debt distress. The International Monetary Fund says 60% of poor countries are facing debt distress, meaning inability to pay, with defaults possible in 12 to 15 countries. These defaults will definitely affect the banks that have made the loans with guarantees from the International Monetary Fund, which mean nothing. Now, there are also warnings from the Bank for International Settlements on foreign exchange derivatives and swap positions. They say that $80 trillion exist in what they call hidden dollar debt. $80 trillion. And what this means is that in order to keep the banks in business, does it mean more quantitative easing? And if so, what will be the effect of that on the inflation policy? On the not the policy, but the real level of inflation. Now, as for the United Kingdom, Chancellor Hunt has announced banking reforms to save the failing City of London institutions. They're talking about loosening the post-2008 regulatory reforms, which in fact were inadequate anyway, because the current debt crisis shows that they did not eliminate the cause of the problem, which was the shift of credit away from physical production into speculation. So what they did is provide liquidity to bail out insolvent institutions, banking institutions in the case of the City of London, but in the United States, corporations that are zombie corporations. They're not making enough profits to pay the interest on their debt. What's the benefit of bailing them out? Well, it keeps the banks from having to write off the debt, which would mean the banks would fail. It also means the executives can continue to collect their bonuses, especially as they use funds from the quantitative easing to buy up their own company's stock. All of this is paving the way for a bigger crash. And I'll have more on this tomorrow. So spread this video, share it, talk to people about this, and I'll once again append to the description section the fundamental principles drafted by Helga Zepp-LaRouche to bring about a new financial and strategic architecture. Thanks, and see you tomorrow.